Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dive episode. I am your co-host Nick Agar Johnson, and with me, as always, my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine evening? Which is definitely the evening we always record.
I'm doing great, Nick. How about you? The heat is on, so
Yeah,
we're all good here.
that's that joke we can keep between the two of us.
Yeah.
But yes, clearly you are doing better than you would have been doing if we had to
Yes.
record this yesterday. So
Yes.
happy for
So,
that at the very least.
yeah, happy to be here.
So we have got two very interesting prospects, and I think a lot more in line with the kinds of prospects that we usually go for, as opposed to the last couple of weeks where we've been basically mixing it up, picking the kinds of players that the other usually goes for. But I think there's a lot more to say about the guy who you chose for this week. So let's go ahead and get started with the first of our two players.
Yeah. So I forgot we're going to do that. But
yeah, see, this is the moment where Nick screws up the transition and poor Paige has to deal with that. Okay. So that's my bad. Okay. But let's go for it. All right, who's your player for this week?
Yeah, so I picked Christian Anderson. He's one of the best shot makers in this class, one of the best guards in this class as well. There's been a lot said about him just in terms of the guard class, right? I mean, he doubled his production from his freshman year to sophomore year. A lot of talk after his game against Baylor. I mean, he was 8 for 10 from the three-point line. He's just one of the best shot makers in this class, Nick. Yes, he's undersized at 6'2", 165, but I mean, he plays a lot bigger and stronger than that. And his off the dribble creation, I mean, this guy has every counter in the book. I mean, he can hit transition threes. He can shoot off the catch, off spot ups. He's great going off screens in the pick and roll as well. And if you're comparing him to, Kean Wagler and, Phylon that we'll talk about later, it kind of comes down to, for me, I had him higher than those two just because I believe solely in his shot creation and off the dribble creation as well. And with him being undersized too, it's kind of a point of, not a lot of, undersized guards really make it in the NBA, right? They're not really looked at as a primary ball handler or, shot creator. But with him, I believe in what I've been seeing so far this year for him. And to dive into the numbers a little bit, he's averaging 20.2 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 7.4 assists on 49, 45, and 76 shooting splits. And he's doing that at an absurd rate. I mean, if you look at his assist percent numbers, it's 33% assist rate, which is insane. And from last year too, he doubled that. And his production too, I think, his at the rim numbers aren't the best, right? It's a little under 60%, but I think he's very crafty when he goes to the rim, and I think he does struggle with length and size at the rim, but I mean, his counters are there, right? And he's such a great downhill driver. And I was thinking about, comparisons for him, right? When I'm looking at, him being a smaller guard and everything. But his tough shot making ability kind of reminds me of someone. I don't know if you had this thought either, but.
No, go for it. I'm curious.
Yeah. So Keontae George a little bit. Obviously Keontae is bigger than him and stronger than him just, right now. And he's also a couple inches taller than him too. But one thing that stood out to me is that, Keontae struggled, he kind of struggled from the 3-point line a lot, but his tough shot making ability and off the dribble shooting, continue to stand out. And look what he's doing in the NBA now. I mean, he is, making a star of himself for the Utah Jazz. And obviously with Bryce Sensabaugh too. I mean, they have a great young core to start off with too, but just watching, Keontae at Baylor and Christian Anderson now, I see a lot of similarities with their tough shot making ability. And just going back to the Baylor game, just because it's the most recent one, and people might be more familiar with that. He's hitting one-legged threes. He's, he's great. I love his ability to come off re-screens too, which I think is a very underrated skill just from, you can come off a pick and roll, you can hit the short man, right? But, having that poise and patience, and he's great playing with pace. I mean, he can stop on a dime. He uses a snake dribble a lot to force defenses to collapse on him. And then he's great at, processing, right? I think when you're looking at smaller guards too, one thing that needs to stand out to me is their decision-making. And the thing with him is that he can make all the reads, right? High level reads. He's not just, hitting the short roll or hitting the open shooter. He'll actually drive into traffic and, process if, okay, JT Toppin's not open. Let me swing it out, replay the play again and like, let's try again. Or, or he'll just get a 3-point shot from the parking range out, right? So he's able to do a lot of things at a really efficient and high level clip. And his pace, his poise, his decision making is just next level. And I think he's really starting to get that trajectory going in terms of what people are seeing. I mean, Nathan had a great thread the other night of, he thinks he's an all-star caliber level guard. And I think that is attributing to his tough shot making ability and, his 3-level scoring as well.
So I want to address a couple of the things that you brought up before I get into my lengthy dialogue, which I'll try and keep as non-lengthy as possible for the sake of everybody involved. The Keontae George comparison is a fascinating one for multiple reasons. I think it's one of those things where, this seems obvious to say, but I think it's worth repeating. Saying there's a 2-inch difference in player height makes a hell of a lot more difference for a 6'2" versus a 6'4" guy than, say, a 6'8" versus a 6'10" guy, right? Like, there's some differences, to be clear. Like a 6'10" guy is more likely to be a big, maybe an undersized center as opposed to like a big 4, or, in the older days of basketball, that wasn't a big 4. But, conceptually, like a 6'8" guy and a 6'10" guy are usually going to be used in pretty similar ways. A 6'4" guy has a lot more leeway, both defensively and in terms of offensive fit, to be more of a combo guard type, like Keontae George is.
Yeah.
I think the flip side of that is Christian Anderson is a much better passer than Keontae
for
George.
Sure.
Yeah. And in a way that I think makes a dramatic difference, which I think, gets me to the start of where I wanted to go with this dialogue, which is, in preparing for this show over the last couple of days, I did a deeper film dive on Christian Anderson than I've done so far this season. And it's something that I talked about on this show. It's got to be a couple years now, at least, but something that I talked about with Tyler Rucker when he was on the show at one point, of how usually in January of every year, I do a pretty substantial redo of my big board. And the reason for that is very simple, which is in my article from earlier this month, the Deep Dives model article, I said that the biggest difficulty for me in terms of prospect evaluation is essentially off-ball defense and figuring out who got lost in a scheme versus who was doing what they were supposed to do in a scheme that fell apart. I lied. By far, the most difficult part of draft evaluation for me is anchoring bias in both directions. I don't want to say, oh, this guy had a fantastic game, I got to bump him 5 spots up my board. This guy had a terrible game, I'm dropping him out of the first round. Right? It's like the part of the reason that I rant against small sample size as frequently as I do is because that is a really big problem for me. And, something else that Tyler Rucker said, perhaps on that show, if he didn't, he said it thousands of other places, of you don't want to judge a prospect by their best game or their worst game. And so, it's like you don't want to get too high on one game and too low on another. But I think, and part of the reason I find it really helpful to, not entirely, but essentially redo my big board around January every year is I don't want to be too quickly moved off my evaluation of especially freshmen, in terms of their high school film, right? Like if, I'm trying to think of a good example in recent memory, and the first thing that I can think of, unfortunately, is, a player who I go to with this a lot, of Cliff Alexander, who was like 5th or something in his high school class, got to the college level, and it was quickly clear that his only advantage was athleticism and playing at a higher level rather than the high school competition he was dominating. He wasn't that same kind of player. But the thing with that is I don't want to make that judgment in November when I've seen 3 games from a guy in college and multiple years worth of high school film, right? Like if a guy was 5th in his recruiting class and has 4 bad games to start the season, I feel stupid dropping him too far. The flip side of that, though, is, and I promise this is where I actually get back to the point, the flip side of that is that I was wrong about Christian Anderson. I had him too low on my board. I was too worried about the defensive stuff. I was too worried about the finishing numbers, given his size of, he's a solid finisher, right? But he's not he's not like a great finisher. And, as the competition gets bigger, when you're a small guard, that becomes more and more of an issue. But after the deep dive that I did on Christian Anderson for today, I realized that I was leaning too much on last season, where he was a very good, but clearly second round prospect on my board. He has made a dramatic step forward this year. And, the other side of the fact that he's made a dramatic step forward this year is that a lot of the things that I was worried about with him last year, as I go back and look at the numbers and some of the data from last year, I'm realizing I should not have been as worried about them as I was. Yeah, he didn't have a great field goal percentage, but that's because he took, twice as many threes as twos, and he still hit 38% of his threes. This year, he's been much better from 2-point range, but he's also been much more proficient from 2-point range, right? It's not just, I'm going to run the pick and roll, and if I get a wide open jumper, I don't care if it's from 30 or from 25, I'm taking it, but that's the shot I'm taking, right? Whereas this year, he's shown so much more in the mid-range. He's an incredible passer, but him having those openings in the mid-range allows him to hit those lanes more easily. It's not like he wasn't playing with JT Toppin last season either, right? So it's not just, the context has gotten so much better. And, with all of that, I think the thing that stood out to me by far the most in watching the Christian Anderson film is he is exceptionally gifted at getting out of bad situations offensively that he has absolutely no right to get out of. Like I was watching this one play where he's dribbling, he falls down with his dribble outside the 3-point line, is able to keep his dribble active away from the defender long enough to feed a pass to JT Toppin. He cuts to the rim, JT Toppin hits him on the throwback, and then he wraps it back around to JT Toppin for a dunk. It's like, that should have been a turnover twice. Yeah. And instead, because he's got such incredible vision, because he's got such a preternatural sense of where he is, where everybody else is, where the ball is, all of the above, he just finds a way to get out of situations that should be dead ends at a level that, I'm not quite as all in as Nathan is, but that's the kind of thing that you see from all-star guards. It's not just, okay, I can make the easy play. It's not even, okay, I can make the hard play. It's, this play alone is worth 2 points for our team, because it would have been transition bucket going back the other way. Instead, it's an easy dunk. And he just does that over and over and over and over and over again from everywhere on the floor.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the points I was going to bring up too is that, we're basically talking about, his decision-making is next level. Yeah. From last year to this year, it's like night and day, honestly, just because, everything's up, right? His points, his assists, his usage rate, everything, how he sees the floor. He's making real winning plays that you're like, hey, I want that guy on my team, right? And then against BYU, they were kind of, in pick and roll actions instead of, help, drop coverage or, going up on him because he's a 3-level scorer. They're actually blitzing him right out of the pick and roll. And instead of, freaking out or whatever, he splits the blitz and goes right to the basket because, he has that awareness. And in those schemes, it's really great to see, because that's only going to continue up into the next level in the NBA. And then I forget what game, but it was a sideline out of bounds action at half court. There was 4 seconds on the shot clock. I forget who threw it into him, and someone was guarding him up at half court. But, he just triple threat, swung through, and just all the way to the basket in 4 seconds and had a great dunk and cleared the lane for himself. That's type of plays that, you can be like, oh, this guy had this play, but that was kind of it. But, it's just one after another, as you mentioned, that there's so many to count where, in those situations, it's great to see that, he just knows what he has to do. And he's so self-aware too of the shot clock, of different schemes, and also where his teammates are, on the court, and those actions too, which is super comforting, when we're evaluating these guys. And then just going back to, his shot creation that I'm so high on. 57% of his threes are unassisted, which is insane. Yeah. And he doesn't need a lot of screens, right? I know I mentioned, his rescreening ability, that he loves to, use those, especially with JT Toppin. But how he can, he has the double cross, he has the snatch back, the step back, he has, all these counters that he can go to, and he does it so fast and so quick. And then he also is great at relocating as well. So, you really, and on the defensive end, you know, when you're guarding him, he can do a little bit of everything. And, you know, you think that, you know, you have him where you want him, and then he'll drag you out to 3-point line and just, you know, pop one over your head. I mean, yeah, it's been really great to watch him so far this season.
And I am not someone who buys in as strongly as some do to the difference of 82 game versus 16 game player. I think the difference between the two is over exaggerated, but there is a difference. And I think a huge part of that difference is that skill that Christian Anderson has of, okay, so you know that I'm this special shooter, so you're going to, you know, go over every screen, right? You're going to, you know, play me super tight out on the perimeter. It's like, great, I'm also a fantastic passer. Like that's not going to help you either, right? It's like, okay, well, we don't want him clearing space in the lane for JT Toppin, so instead we're going to play him, you know, force him off the 3-point line and then, you know, play him into hell on the baseline. It's like, we're not going to let him get all the way to the rim. Okay, great. He's in like the 94th percentile in shooting off the dribble. It's like, if you give him that 18-foot midi, he's going to take it all day. If you give him a 15-foot runner, he's going to take it all day, and he's going to make it a lot of the time because he's, you know, the only area of the floor from which he's not like 80th percentile or better on synergy is at the rim. And he's still solid. You know, he's like, I think it was 56th percentile when I checked this morning. So yeah, it's like, okay, he's still, you know, solid, right? It's not like that's a problem for him. You know, we've talked about, I mean, Janai Mobley was one, Ibuka Okori was another of, you know, guards who have 2 of the 3 levels figured out, but not necessarily the third. Christian Anderson shoots well enough around the rim that, again, I was worried about it last year when he looked a little smaller. Like you said, 6'2", 165. I would be stunned if he's still listed at 165. Like, I'm willing to bet like he just looks bigger than he did last year in a way that I think is significant. But also, and more to the point, is like, okay, now we have a second year of proof because he shot exactly a hair under 60% at the rim last season too. Right. And it was a smaller sample size and he was a smaller player and he was being contested less heavily because he was less of a part of the offense, whatever. Add in as many caveats as you want. The point is he's shooting pretty reliably just around 60% at the rim. Given how fantastic he is everywhere else, that is more than good enough. And so when you add in the fact that, again, it's like, okay, what do we take away, right? We take away the thing he's best at. We take away the thing he's second best at. We leave him with what he's third best at. And so you're basically saying, you know, depending on how you equivocate about his skill set, it's like either we're letting this guy get pull-up middies all day long and he can hit them at a really high rate, or we're just letting him slip easy passes to the big man on the pick and roll every single time. And it's like, guess what? It might actually be worse to do that when it's JT Toppin as opposed to your average NBA roll man. But even still, it ain't going to be great, right? And there's multiple years of proof now that he will figure that out. But this year in particular has really been like, okay, he's just more solid at, you know, just frame-wise, honestly, more than anything else. And that makes it easier for him to escape his way out of those terrible situations. But also it's like he's able to get out of those terrible situations because you throw something at him and he has 3 different things he can do in response, as opposed to, well, I guess I got to shoot, or, well, I guess I got to pass, right? Like he's got multiple counters at all 3 levels. And so therefore, even if you take away the thing that he's best at or the thing that he's second best at, unlike with one of these guards who struggles in one of the 3 areas, he's still going to find a way to beat you. It might not be quite as good, but he's going to find that way. And, you know, especially with the decision-making, as you talked about, like he's going to make the right read too. So you can't just hope that he's going to sail a pass because he's not going to do that either.
Yeah. I mean, you know, he has a 2.43 assist to turnover ratio, double from last year. And he's doing a little bit of everything, even at a higher level than last year, as you mentioned. I think the frame and size a lot part of that because he does look bigger on the court as well. And I think he looks faster even too. I think he's more bursty and I think he's a lot more quicker in every sense, especially on the offensive end too. But I mean, the dude's just an offensive weapon at all 3 levels. And then on dribble twos as well, he's shooting 45.7%. So I think, you know, if you're a defender, you're kind of like, how the heck do I guard this guy? Because he's gonna, you know, he can burn me every which way possible, which, you know, and for us saying that about, you know, a 6'2" guard, right? It's kind of, you know, you kind of have to put it in perspective. It's like he's doing this at such an efficient rate all around the board. And with one of the best teams in the country and one of the most productive players in the country too, is JT Toppin. So I think, you know, the sky's the limit for him. And, you know, if he continues to, you know, show everything that he's been showing this past season and into more conference play, into March Madness. I think, he's going to be a big riser on NBA draft boards for sure.
Shall we get into the defensive side of the Christian Anderson discussion?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Christian Anderson's defense. Let's get your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think, when I look at him, right, I think, he has the unreal decision-making. He's an incredible shooter and playmaker, but he also has that defensive aspect as well that, you're not going to be too worried about him on the court. Yes, he's undersized and everything like that, but I think there's questions around, like, is he athletic enough, right? Is his size, going to be, hit and miss at the next level? I'm not too concerned with his defense just because of the effort that he shows. And I think he's capable of, blocking out. I think he's capable of running transition with these guys. But I think he sometimes gets a little too out of position, especially when he's a weak side defender and in switch scenarios. I mean, he's not a versatile defender, right? I mean, he's a point of attack guy, and he's not going to be locked down or anything. But I think he's improved from last year to this year of, his screen navigation, staying with guys, obviously his bigger frame as well that has helped him. But I mean, there's still cons to him defensive wise too. I mean, he's not gonna, be able to switch on, 2 to 3. I really trust him at the point of attack, but that's basically it. I mean, he's not gonna, like, if he switched on, like, say, JT Thompson, misses a pull up or, post up, right? He's not going to go in there and
no,
he's not going to go in there and, be that rebounding, smaller guard that's, like a Jose Alvarado type, right? That's always just in the play and kind of a pest. He's not really like that on defensive end. He's, once in a while he'll, block out, those big man and try to get the rebound. But I mean, you're not going to look at him for that. He's more of a, okay, you guys will do that, and then I'll run up the court and, get a bucket or two in transition. But I mean, he fights, right? Which is all, you want to see, at least at the bottom level, at the foundation level. But there's a lot more, that needs to happen for him defensively to, not be, I wouldn't say he's like a liability at any sense of the word, but I truly just trust him, guarding point guards right now and at the point of attack.
Broadly speaking, I agree with everything you just said. I'm slightly more concerned, I think, and there are a couple of specific things I'm more concerned about. The size is the big one, obviously. Yeah. It's like, again, we talked about this last week with Okori, right? It's like, if you're locked as a one-positional defender, it's just harder to make the rest of the scheme work. I think he's gotten better at screen navigation. I still don't think he's really that great at it. Yeah. And that's, again, it's less of a concern for him than it would be with someone who you're going to want to have switching, because, like, you're going to want to avoid switching Christian Anderson at pretty much any cost, because he's not going to be big enough to deal with most of these guys, right? So for me, I'm a bit more concerned, I think, just because I'm lower on the screen navigation stuff, because, again, that's not as important for him as it would be for other defenders, but he's still... It's not even like, he gets leveled on screens, because that does happen, but that's the kind of thing of like, okay, you'll grow bigger, right? Like that happens for pretty much every 19, 20-year-old ever, right? So I'm not as worried about that, but the screen navigation stuff, and again, this gets back to my point from earlier about, the difficulty of parsing, are you doing this because that's what you're supposed to do in the scheme, or are you doing this because you've shot the ball 74 times and, you're running the offense and it's the fourth quarter and you're gassed, and so you just went under that screen that you shouldn't have gone under on, right? Like those are two different levels of it. And, as we've talked about time and time before, and we will talk about time and time again, defense is such an important, effort is such an important foundation of defense, just period, for all players across positions. And so the fact that he has, seemingly improved at screen navigation despite his offensive burden going up dramatically, I think that's a good sign. I think it's still not good enough. And quite frankly, if he has a sudden growth spurt, fantastic. I wouldn't bet on it. He'll probably put on strength, right? Like that's not as much of a concern as, he's 6'2", and we'll see what the measurements come out at when he goes to the combine, presumably. But I am a bit more worried, I think, about the defense than you, but I'm not like worried. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to belabor the point here, right? It's like there's, you know, if he can get to a point where he's just fine, then that's all you really need. And like he does do some good stuff at the point of attack, right? Again, I don't want to belabor the point of like, oh, this guy's an absolute zero defensively. He's, you know, a problem. It's like, no, it's not that, but it's also like I'm struggling to find where the room for improvement is in a way that makes a dramatic defensive difference, right? It's like if he gets significantly better at navigating screens, that would be a huge plus in my mind. But also, it's like that's a pretty minor part of defense to be hung up on. And really, the important point is just he's a one position defender. And if, you know, we'll talk about this a lot more, spoiler alert for the player that I chose for this week, but like, if you're someone who can be picked on in a scheme where it's like, we're just trying to get a switch onto that guy every single possession, that's a problem. And that's why small, you know, more than anything else, in my opinion, why small guards have been on the decline in the NBA recently. And, you know, with Anderson, again, it's like the fact that he's solid at the point of attack is really important, is much more important than the screen navigation. But he's already pretty good there. I don't see him, you know, he's not going to turn into Amen Thompson athletically overnight, right? He's not going to grow 6 inches overnight. You know, maybe it's theoretically possible, but I doubt it, right? That's in like the 99.99999th percentile outcome. It's like lightning doesn't strike the same place 74 times in a row, right? Like I don't want to bet on that.
Yeah.
But in terms of what he can fix, I don't know how impactful it's going to be. And I really don't think it's going to change him into a multi-positional defender if he gets a lot better at the off-ball stuff. It's like, okay, are you going to make your closeouts? Are you going to, you know, go over screens when you're supposed to, go under screens when you're supposed to most of the time? Are you at least going to fight through them? Great. That would be an improvement. But again, there isn't this like mine of untapped defensive potential that I see for him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like when I'm comparing, you know, Christian Anderson to another 6'2" guard that we talked about, you know, Ibuka Okori, right? Obviously, Okori has 20 pounds on Christian Anderson. And it's more, you know, relevant, especially I think in Okori's, you know, upper half, especially in his arms. Because I think Christian Anderson, like he has muscles to gain, right? That's not like, you know, people know that. But I think the thing that sets them apart too is that Okori is, I think in my opinion, you know, great as a chaser defender, right? And I think that goes along with he's a little better at screen navigation than
I would say he's much better at screen navigation.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, that's just, you know, us nitpicking a little bit. But I mean, if Christian Anderson can get to that level and mix, you know, what he's already doing as a 3-level scorer, I mean, then you're looking at maybe we can have this guy on a 2 or, you know, whatever the case may be, and not as much of a, you know, pick at guy that defenses are going to look to, you know, at the next level in the NBA.
And, you know, insert Obama voice, which I'm not actually going to try to do, but let me be clear. The relevance of Christian Anderson being a 10% better finisher at the rim versus Okori is so much bigger than the difference that the screen navigation makes. It's dramatic, right? It's, you know, it's stupid to put it like this, but it's literally a difference between, are you a 2-level scorer or are you a 3-level scorer, right? Christian Anderson being a 3-level scorer is so much more important for the archetype of what both of those players are. And so, you know, when we're talking about the defense stuff, you know, there's a reason that the defense section, I'm pretty confident, is going to be a lot shorter than the offense section, right? And it's not, I don't think it's as much that, you know, we're doing this wrong as it is that, you know, the defense is a lot simpler, I think, to discuss. Whereas the offense is like, you can talk about 17 different things that he does well. On the defensive end is like, in my mind, you know, there's one thing that he does pretty well, could maybe do better, but, you know, I don't think it's going to be dramatic, which is the point of attack stuff. There's one thing where he really could do a lot better, but it's not the end of the world if he does. Like, if Christian Anderson is this bad at screen navigation at the NBA level, it's not going to make that much of a difference, right? Yeah. But if we're trying to give the full picture of who Christian Anderson is as a basketball player, we do have to talk about it.
Yeah. And the reason, and like you bring that up because it's 100% right, because he does so many amazing things on the offensive ball that, you know, if he gets hit by a screen here and there and misses, you know, going under instead of over, it's not the end of the world, because, you know, he is such a high level producer when the ball is in his hands and what he can do on that side of the court, that it's going to make up for those, you know, mishaps on the defensive end.
Yeah, like the difference between him missing one screen versus, like, you know, that play that I was talking about where he, like, you know, is literally on one knee and somehow turns that into a bucket as opposed to a turnover going the other way. Like, one of those for every 5 poor screen navigations, you're still up on the whole, right?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, again, for all the wonder that Abuko Okori has put together on the offensive end, and I do not mean to disparage that by any shape of the imagination, there's a difference here.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And like, they're, you know, I'm talking about them because, you know, we're going to have a broader discussion about the guard class a little bit at the end. But obviously Okori, right, you know, he gets to the rim a lot more than Christian Anderson does. And, you know, free throw sense wise, right? I mean, Christian Anderson's only getting to line about 4 times a game compared to Okori, which is 8. But, you know, Christian Anderson is the better finisher overall than Okori is as well, which, you know, kind of puts Okori in that box. So he kind of has to, you know, coincide a little bit more on the defensive end, even though his usage rate is also through the roof too. But, you know, Christian Anderson has a little bit more leeway just because, you know, he can attack defenses a lot more, you know, at all 3 levels at a more efficient rate than Okori can.
All right. Shall we move on to my prospect?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I picked a prospect about whom I don't think it's unfair to say that there's a lot less to talk about than there is with Christian Anderson. And the primary reason for that is nothing to do with either of them as players, but rather to do with the fact that Alex Karaban is a pretty established commodity at this point. And, you know, I've basically had him at pretty much the same range on my board for like 3 years running now, of like very, very early second round. And that's where I have him now. And it's very interesting to me because in that time, while I've had him at almost an identical place on my personal board, he has swung hilariously wildly on, you know, most public boards, most, you know, general sort of draft space evaluation. And I think there are a couple of nuanced and interesting reasons to get into with that. And I think there's a very stupid reason that, unfortunately, I think is the vast majority of why people change their opinions on Alex Karaban. Which is that last year Alex Karaban shot 34.7% from 3-point range. And that was a dramatic outlier compared to literally every single other season that Alex Karaban has played basketball at any level. But, you know, there were quite a few people who were like, oh, well, if Alex Karaban can't shoot, you know, generally speaking, then he's not an NBA player. And look, it's like, you know, as I'm trying to game out the timing in my head. I believe this episode will come out slightly before, and spoiler alert, we have a awesome article from Jam Hines coming out tomorrow where he talks about a UConn game in which Alex Karaban did not shoot particularly well. And so, you know, doing my Obama voice again, let me be clear. There is a big difference between this guy did badly in one game and it showed the flaws of what happens if this guy can't shoot versus people who decided that, no, actually the entirety of his previous basketball career doesn't matter because him shooting worse this year is better for my agenda, and therefore that's all I'm going to care about. Like, Alex Karaban is a 38 to 40% three-point shooter, as he's been basically, you know, as far back as I have data on Alex Karaban. That's the kind of shooter he is, and this is the exact inverse of the Derek Williams problem that I've talked about time and time again, of if a really, really good shooter has one bad outlying year, that doesn't mean he stops being a really, really good shooter. And this is a painful one, but Marco Bellinelli had, I think, one season in his entire NBA career where he was below 35% from three-point range. And that was the year he shot 30% for the Sacramento Kings, which was his one season in a Sacramento Kings uniform. I think there might have been other things at play in that particular season for Marco Bellinelli as opposed to just the general rule with this kind of thing. But like, even the greatest shooters, you can find, like, there's, you know, one season where Bruce Bowen really was not knocking down his threes. I forget which year it was. I'm trying to do this off the top of my head as best I can. And as you know, Paige, I have a god-awful memory. But, you know, generally speaking, the idea is even with a full NBA season, the sample size isn't necessarily large enough that a guy who has a cold 2-week stretch can't look like a lot worse of a shooter than he actually is because he had a cold 2-week stretch. That's basically what happened to Alex Karaban. And all of a sudden people are like, oh, this guy can't play. It's like, well, yeah, his game doesn't make sense in an NBA context if he's a bad shooter, but he's never been a bad shooter. There was the 1 year where he was slightly below average. And so, everything else is like, okay, very well-known commodity, right? He's a really good passer for his position. He's bigger than you think he is. He's like a legit 6'9" type of dude. He's not like, 6'7" skinny wing size. He's built. He's had offense won through him. He's won multiple national championships. Dude can play basketball. And then the question is just, okay, but how much of what he does well at the college level translates to the NBA level? And while I was thinking about that, as I do more often than I think the vast majority of people on this earth, I pulled up Ryan Anderson's basketball reference page. And, I've trotted out Ryan Anderson as an example multiple times because for me, what Ryan Anderson's sort of NBA career signified in my head was, oh, the league just moved past him athletically and, he wasn't going to be able to keep up with faster fours and, he wasn't quite big enough or good enough of a rim protector to be a real 5 and he sort of disappeared. When I looked at his basketball reference page this morning, I realized that there was a very important thing that I had not included, which was in Ryan Anderson's second to last NBA season, he shot 25% from 3-point range. It's like, okay, so if there's an athleticism problem and he stops shooting and he's also on the wrong side of 30, then Ryan Anderson fell out of the NBA after a 12-year career. If anybody, and I mean literally anybody, drafted in the second round has a 12-year NBA career, that is a very successful draft pick. And so if you get Alex Karaban with, I believe I have him 38th on my board right now. If you get Alex Karaban with the 38th overall pick, and you're a team that can insulate him defensively even the tiniest bit, because he's 6'9", right? He's not, you can hide him on basically anybody who doesn't move great or isn't, a 7'3" bruiser type, right? It's like you can hide Alex Karaban in a lot more places than you can hide Christian Anderson. And even still, like, it's not like, oh, he's only out there to shoot, right? He's, a great connective playmaker, and that's a huge part of the puzzle. And so for me, it's like, look, there's still places for guys like that in the NBA, right? Like, God, now of course I'm completely blanking on who my perfect example was that I had stored up for, hey, someone who's not quite the best athlete, but who can shoot like that. Of course, Duncan Robinson.
Yeah.
Duncan Robinson is still starting in the NBA. People thought his NBA career was over after he flamed out with Miami. Guess what? He's starting for the best team in the Eastern Conference right now. Yeah, he's a terrible defender. Yeah, he gets picked on at every possible defensive opportunity. When he's on, he provides enough that doesn't matter. And I'm not saying Alex Karaban is a starter. I'm saying you get that dude for 12 minutes a game, come off your bench, be someone who is going to be a plus playmaker for himself and others, who, you don't want self-creating, but who is a reliable 38 to 40% 3-point shooter and, will hurt you defensively, but not as much as a guy who does the same thing, but he's 6'4" instead.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it's like, again, I don't know how much more there is to say about Alex Karaban than what I've already said, but like, I'm not going to drop him out of my top 40 because if you get the, if you get a non-injury riddled / terrible outcome for Alex Karaban and he ends up very similarly to Ryan Anderson, it's like, okay, so you get a part-time starter, part-time sixth man who plays really solid basketball for, 8-9 years and then falls off a cliff pretty quickly. But, you have those 8-9 years because Alex Karaban is an older prospect. It's going to be like 5, 6 to 8 years. You know what I did there? I had to save that before it went the direction that it was about to. But, it's like if you get that player for 8 years with the 37, 38, 39, whatever pick, again, huge win for your franchise.
Yeah. And I think, you hit the nail on the head, when you're selling, kind of sell me this pen on Alex Karaban, right? Who wouldn't want, he's a leader, he's a winner, he's a producer, and he's available. And, you mentioned he won 2 national titles with UConn. And he also, he hasn't missed a game in his 4 years at UConn either. which is insane. So, I mean, if you're getting that type of value, availability, production, can shoot the crap out of the ball in the second round, why wouldn't you, be thrilled to have Alex Karaban on your team? And, he's great coming off the bench, 10 to 12 minutes. Yes, he's not the best defender in the world, but since he is, 6'9", 210 pounds plus, you're getting
he's at least
strong,
230. Sorry. Yeah. There's no way he's still 210.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't buy it. Sorry, continue.
No, yeah, I saw that and I was like, I'm not sure, because, as the season goes on too, and like websites aren't really updated, and I haven't seen Karaban play in person. It's not like, Morris Johnson, where like, oh my, yeah, this dude is like 250. Yeah. But yeah, he's definitely, more than 210. But I mean, you're getting a strong body that, he's not the most athletic, right? He's not the best. He doesn't have the best mobility, laterally, and he's not, he's not gonna, jump out the gym, anytime soon, right? But he's an effort guy. He's a reliable guy. Over his career, he's only averaged 1 turnover per game. And with his size and skill set and his position, that's awesome. I mean, who wouldn't want that type of player on your team? And he's been in draft conversations, throughout his whole college basketball career. And yes, he's on the older side at 23, but I mean, you need those players on your team, Nick. And like, as the NBA is progressing, I mean, we talk about it probably every episode, right? When we're projecting these guys, is that these players, having a deep bench of players that you can rely on, that, are going to put the ball in the basket, aren't going to be a reliability on defense, to a certain extent, right? But can hold their own and aren't going to make mistakes, and, you can trust them. That's Alex Karaban.
Yeah. And, again, like, I don't think there's a world where he's anything more than a bad defender at the NBA level. But he's not as, I'm trying to find, because 0 is not the right way to put it either, but like, he doesn't give you nothing defensively, right? Like, I think his spike in shot blocks last season, or like early on last season, was, probably not, given that he's been below a block a game every year, except like the first couple weeks of last season where he had 2.5 blocks a game, right? But it's like, I don't think the same people who are complaining about his, his anomaly 3-point percentage are probably also not saying, hey, but he had this dramatic uptick in blocks. And it's like, especially early last year, like, I thought he made some solid adjustments in terms of, just being more available on the weak side, right? And that sort of leads back to exactly what you were saying of like, yeah, he's not an athlete, by NBA standards. I feel like I clarify that every single time, but like by NBA standards, he's not an athlete. By the way, he's listed at 225 on Real GM, which I think is probably closer to.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's like, okay, so he's not a good athlete. He's still big and he knows where he's supposed to be. And, if the guy attacking the rim is slow enough, he can make it for a weak side shot block. You shouldn't rely on him for it. But it's not like, and I love watching him as a basketball player. So I have to give that caveat before I say what's next. But Kenneth Faried was dog shit on defense his entire NBA career. And the difference in athleticism between Alex Karaban and Kenneth Faried is about the same as the difference in athleticism between Wilt Chamberlain and Ted Cruz. Like, it's not a contest. Like, Kenneth Faried, was one of the most high-flying, insane dunker type, undersized big men that has ever been in the NBA. Like, he was sensational, and I loved watching him play, but he never defended at even an adequate level, right? Alex Karaban at least knows where he's supposed to be. And so he doesn't get there a lot of the time because he's not that fast, and, he doesn't have ridiculous hops, but like, he's not like Eddie Curry level ground bound, right? He's not completely immobile. He's not a traffic cone. He's just not great at it. And that's going to be more of a problem at the NBA level. But it goes to the flip side of a conversation that my father and I have had hundreds and hundreds of times about, where he talks about Bill Russell, who, he was too young to watch, but pretends he wasn't. And I talk about Ben Wallace, who, given when I started getting into basketball, I was kind of also too young to watch like his peak live, but you know, I was alive during his peak, which I guess my dad technically was, but whatever. Beside the point. But you know, the idea being the conversation was essentially going around the notion of, hey, winning a game 85-70 is the same margin of victory as 115 to 100, right? It's like if you get there purely on the defensive end, still a 15-point win, right? And that goes the same for the modern NBA, where it's more like winning a game 155-140 is the same as winning it 120-105, right? And so if you put Alex Karaban out there and yeah, the defense is really bad, but he provides enough of an offensive lift that he can make up for it, then he has that 12-year-long NBA career like Ryan Anderson. And quite frankly, I think that at least for the first few years of his career, he'll be able to be athletic enough to keep up. And then once he hits the wrong side of 30, maybe he falls out of the league just like Ryan Anderson did. Yeah. Again, if you get him from 23 to 30, that's a 7-year NBA career. You know, by the time you get past pick 40, it's almost a coin flip whether these guys even play in the NBA at all. Yeah. If you get someone at 40 who it's like, he's going to be part of our rotation for 3-4 years, and then maybe the athleticism gap gets too big once he hits 30, like what? And, you know, this is something I've talked about for a while. And the first time I started talking about it, the example I used was Jay Crowder, which tells you exactly how long I've been talking about.
I was actually going to bring him up too.
There you go. See, but that's the point, right? It's like, why on earth did Jay Crowder go in the second round where everybody knew that he could play basketball? And it was just a matter of, oh, but he's older. He doesn't have quite the potential. Oh, but he's like, okay, but you got him for 12 years. Like the guy picked behind him, I don't know off the top of my head who that was, but it's like guy picked behind him might not have made the NBA, period.
Yeah.
It's like, which is a more valuable draft pick? And I'm trying to remember if I used this analogy in the piece that I wrote or if I just wrote it and then deleted it because it seemed too asinine and now I get to bring it back up on the podcast instead. But it's like, which is going to give you a better result? If you take a bunch of money and walk into a casino and play blackjack for 2 hours, or if you walk into that same casino, put all of it on green and see what happens when you spin the lottery wheel. And because the difference between a star level NBA player and a rotation player is so dramatic, sometimes it is worth it making that bet on green, especially in the second round when, you know, again, you're swinging for the fences anyway. But there's a difference between really, really, really bad teams drafting early in the second round versus, you know, hey, this, you know, trying to think of like San Antonio, right? San Antonio buys a pick early in the second round and takes Alex Karaban. That's going to be a much better bet for them than swinging for the fences because guess what? They already have Wemby. They already have Stephon Castle. What they need are connective pieces who can shoot. And so if you're the right kind of team to take Alex Karaban, which I feel like I've been too positive because he does have quite a few glaring flaws, right? But if you're a team that can cover for those glaring flaws, he provides so many things that you would want a player to provide that why would you take a chance on, hey, maybe this guy can be a 30-minute-a-game player, but there's like a 10% chance of it versus we're certain this guy is a 12-minute-a-game player. And that's why Ryan Kalkbrenner ended up in my first round last year because it was like, and he's turned out to be much better than that already, but my thesis for that was I don't think there's an NBA team that couldn't use this guy for 10 minutes a game. That player should be a late first, early second every time, in my opinion.
Yeah. And one of the quotes I want to bring up too, Dan Hurley said about Alex Karaban that he's actually the smartest player in the organization besides him. I mean, coming from him, it's kind of, you know, backhanded a little bit.
Like, all right, settle down, guy.
I mean, for him, admitting something like that is huge, right? And like, you know, he's 2-time national champ, right? He hasn't missed a game his whole college career. He's averaged only a turnover a game his whole career as well. You're getting that value and that availability in the second round. Oh, and this guy can shoot, you know, 40% career-wise. You know, why wouldn't you want to have him, you know, on your team, right? And I think the Jay Crowder comparison, just because I'm a Suns fan, you know, we relied on him so much in that 2021, you know, playoff stretch and final stretch because we needed that production out of him and we knew he was going to be there in big time moments. I mean, last year, Karaban, had the game sealing shots against Oklahoma and Marquette, right? He shows up, not just, physically since he hasn't missed a game, but also with, his shot selection. And, he's excellent off the catch, spot up shooter. He's also great in DHO scenarios as well, where he can move a little bit, in tight actions, but he's also great in simpler actions as well, off the catch. I much prefer him, to be in the corner off the catch. But I also do like him in those, little tight actions like DHO handoffs or zoom actions or, off flares as well. Because, you're not going to want him to be, creating for himself off the dribble, right? He's more reliable in that sense. But yeah, I don't know why a team wouldn't, want his value add in the second round. I think it would be a miss for any team because it's like, where you're going to get, 10 to 12 minutes a game, and he's going to come in and, provide those, extra points that, in that production that maybe, your starter isn't having the best night, but, Karaban comes in and, he's 3 for 6 from 3-point line and he gets to the line, twice a game, right? That could be between a winner or a loss, especially, in the playoffs.
All right, so now that Corey Teleba has disowned both of us for saying nice things about Alex Karaban for most of the last 20 minutes, shall we move on to our quick hits?
Yeah, let's do it.
Bit of a snafu there. I am not on my cut-in game today. My apologies to all of you listening at home. But quick hits. So I wanted to start out just because I scouted my first game of 2026 past weekend. So I went with my other co-host, my other co-host Ray LeBeau, to watch UC Davis UC Irvine game, and there were a couple of players that were really solid who I wanted to talk about, and these are borderline guys, right? Like none of these guys are in my top 100, but there were a couple players who I think might have a pro future who I did want to mention, and the key guy for that is Jurian Dixon, who he is, just for those. Oh, sorry. There's two players actually I want to talk about. But let's start with Jurian Dixon, who he is a sophomore guard for. Excuse me. He is a sophomore guard for UC Irvine, and the thing with Jurian Dixon is he makes some of the most ridiculous shots that you're ever going to see a player make, and sometimes that kind of player can be difficult for me to evaluate because I want them to maybe consider shooting slightly less sometimes. The difference between those kind of players and Jurian Dixon is that when Jurian Dixon puts it up, it goes in. Dude's shooting 43% from 3-point range on 5 attempts per game, 45% from the field. Obviously his 2-point percentage is not as good, but part of that is because most of the twos he's taking are, insane mid-range jumpers with like two guys up in his grill, and he still knocks it down. And it's funny because when I went and looked at the box score after the game, I saw, he had 16 points on 14 shots. Not quite the most efficient night, but I think like a very short stretch. And outside of that short stretch where he missed like 4 quick shots, like there was a ridiculous mid-ranger, and then he just flailed at trying to get a foul drawn on his way to the rim and didn't get the call. And so, just had to throw up something ridiculous, and, it didn't go in because sometimes that happens when you have to throw up a ridiculous shot. But he's definitely, of the players that I saw in this game, he's the guy who I think is most likely to be a potential, if not, like draft pick, then somebody who might make his way out of training camp because, he's got decent size. He's 6'5" too. He's someone who is comfortable, with the ball in his hands. Not, he's clearly more of a 2 guard on the guard continuum, but he can do a bit of combo guard stuff. But really the fun of watching him for me was just, no, you can't take the, oh, it went in. Okay. And, again, sometimes those kinds of players frustrate me, but when they're as accurate as Jurian Dixon, yeah. The other couple players I wanted to talk about, one other guy on UC Irvine, Andre Henry, he's someone who, again, he's on the older side. He's not, I don't think, gonna be an NBA player necessarily, but I think there's a PJ Tucker path in the cards for him because he was just a level above everybody else on the court defensively. Like, he's not a big guy. He's 6'4", 175, doesn't he's a good athlete. He's not a great athlete, doesn't have insane bursts, but it was just every single play, like he was the one, telling everybody where to be. He was the one, he was the one directing traffic communication wise. He was the one who was switching onto multiple people on the same possession. And the thing with him is if he were a, 38% 3-point shooter on volume as opposed to a 34% shooter on not that much volume, it would be a lot easier to project him as someone who, might make the NBA wise. But certainly I think that there are plenty of, non-US teams that could use this guy in their rotation. And it's the kind of thing where, sort of like PJ Tucker, right? If you can figure out that corner three to a greater degree than he has so far, there's definitely professional potential for sure. I don't know NBA potential, but of the players in this game, if 3 years from now he ends up making a team out of training camp as like a PJ Tucker type, I wouldn't be particularly surprised. And the third guy I wanted to talk about, I should talk about someone from the home team, right? I should talk about someone from UC Davis. And the guy to talk about with UC Davis is Nils Cooper, who played at Pepperdine and transferred to UC Davis. But really the log line for Nils Cooper is, hey, remember Michael Cooper? This is his son. And it's abundantly clear that this is his son. And it was funny because clearly the best player in the first half. And, as much as Andre Henry had, was operating at a different level defensively than everybody else, Nils Cooper was operating athletically at a different level than everybody else. And so, in the first half, he was quite dominant. In the second half, they switched Andre Henry on him, and he didn't score until he had a free throw with like 18 seconds left in the game. So, great work defensively by Henry. But, if I had to pick someone on the UC Davis team who's a potential NBA player, and I don't think he is, I don't say that to be mean, just in the sense of like, again, there's a whole lot of things you got to do right to be an NBA level player, but it's a lot easier to bet on someone who's got the athletic tools to figure it out as opposed to someone who's just always going to be a step behind, which may sound ridiculous for me to say after the Alex Karaban discussion we just had, but I think he's on a different level with a number of other things in a way that nobody in this UCI game particularly was. But it was fun. I had a great time, and it was nice to get back on the road, see some players in person for the first time. I want to be clear, this calendar year. But
no ceilings is everywhere. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah, Jan was at the UConn game, UConn Georgetown. Yeah. You're at you're Irvine. I was in Michigan last week or a couple weeks ago. So, a lot of upcoming stuff too. So it's excited to see these guys in person and get out of the house a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's a slightly different problem, which I think is bigger for me than it is for most people, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's get to your quick hit because you teased it earlier. And so now we can go full bore into the guard discussion.
Let's do it. Let's see if we can. Cool.
Figure out the technology.
Yeah.
Hey, I got it right this time.
Let's go.
The transitions.
Yeah, so for those that are listening, just audio-wise, obviously on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. But on our Twitter account, Tyler Rucker made this graphic. And we do a lot of like rank 'em or pick one type of graphics just to, create conversation within, the draft Twitter space, college basketball fans. And the three prospects, rank them, obviously 1, 2, 3, you rank them. And then you quote or reply to the tweet. Christian Anderson, Keen Wagler, and then Phylon. And then I wanted to talk about this because, well, me and Nick had them flipped, but we had the same middle guy. Mm-hmm. So I had Anderson, Wagler, and then Phylon. And then Nick, if you want to, go.
Yeah, so here's the funny part. When I responded to this tweet, before I finished my Christian Anderson film dive, I had it the exact opposite order. I had Phylon, Wagler, Anderson. I have since bumped Anderson past Wagler on my board. So, even from 4 hours ago, from what I said about anchoring bias, I've completely ignored that by bumping Christian Anderson up. But I hadn't caught up on his film, and I had for Wagler, obviously, because we've already done him on Deep Dives. Shout out for that. LeBaron Phylon's been basically in lottery conversations all year, so a little bit too rich for our blood over here on the Peasant Deep Dives podcast. We only it's Deep Dives for a reason. We're not talking about the top guys until later in the cycle. We'll get there. In theory, we'll get there. But we've been slumming it with the second round picks all year. So of course we haven't covered LeBaron Phylon yet. He's been lottery conversation all season. But fascinating to me that you have Phylon last of the three.
I think for me, they're mostly back to back on my board.
Sure.
So I think it's like, take this with a grain of salt. It's still, I have to catch up on a little bit of Phylon too. That's why I did this. But Phylon to me, I think Wagler and Anderson are a lot better passer and playmaker than him. But I think, in terms of rim finishing and craftiness and burstiness and obviously production, I think Phylon is better because he's shooting 70% at the rim. I mean, his last few games, he is just a dart downhill too. He is so crafty and so I think he's more athletic than Anderson and Wagler too. And
sure.
He's 6'4", Wagler's 6'6", and Anderson's 6'2". We're going in by 2 inches, I guess, by prospect. But they're very interchangeable to me. I think looking at it now, maybe I would have Wagler third, just because of if I'm valuing what I value in guard prospects. But I think you can go a lot of different ways with that. The most responses to this tweet I've seen, a lot of people have Phylon first, and mine is kind of flipped from that. But I think Wagler is definitely, in these quotes and replies, the second prospect on most of these, interchangeable tweets I've been seeing. But yeah, it could be next day I have it flipped, the other day I have it the other way, right? But I think, valuing tough shot making, playmaking, that's why I have Anderson first, just because I've been a lot more impressed just what I've seen from last year and this year. And I have more to go off too, just because Wagler and Phylon are freshmen too. I think I value kind of, guards that are like proving themselves in other areas and making dramatic increases, just because Anderson has been a way better playmaker from last year to this year too. But yeah, it could change every other day, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I had Wagler and Anderson back to back. I now have Anderson a couple spots higher, but those two I had in very similar range. Phylon I had in a tier slightly above, and there are two primary reasons for that. And both of them, well, one of them you've already mentioned, but the rim finishing is a big one of just as we were talking about with Christian Anderson, right? Especially now that Phylon has both upped his volume and his hit rate from 3-point range, he's established himself as much more of a 3-level guy than I thought he was last year, when the question was, can this guy shoot? Like, it's insane. He's finishing 62% from 2-point range right now, which is absurd. Like, a lot of big men don't finish that well in 2-point range, and it's not like Phylon is only taking shots at the rim, right? But it's like, that was the thing last year is, wow, this guy gets downhill at an incredible rate and, ridiculous, crazy finisher around the rim. Can he shoot at all? And, early indications from this season are, he can shoot, right? And so it's not like he couldn't shoot at all last year, right? It's like, he had a somewhat healthy volume of attempts. 32% is a far cry from, we talked about Dash Daniels recently, how like Dyson shooting 11%. Like it's a pretty big gap between 11% and 32%, but obviously 32% is not great. I'm not sure he's quite a 38% 3-point shooter, but his finishing at the rim, and then the biggest reason that I have him above the other two is I think Phylon can be a special defender. Like I really, especially at the point of attack, I think he's phenomenal. And with the other two guys, I have to talk myself into what they do well defensively. And I'll be honest, that's a lot harder for Wagler than it is for Anderson, even with the size difference. With Phylon, it's like, I'm not worried about either end of the floor.
Yeah. And I think I misspoke. I accidentally called Phylon a freshman. I know he's a sophomore.
I didn't want to say anything. I was hoping that would slide under the radar.
I got my words twisted. I think I would just think about Anderson.
Given the number of basic words that I have butchered today alone,
you're
more than good.
Yeah, we're all human. But yeah, no, that's a good point. I think once I catch up more on Phylon and Alabama as a whole, I want to deep dive into Amari Allen too, because he's been skyrocketing upwards too. I think, I could definitely switch these three around, but they do a bunch of things, really well. And they, this class is, one of the best guard classes in a minute too. You can just go down the list of, and then our guy Donovan Dent that we talked about, in the early episodes of deep dives this season, he had his best game to knock off Purdue. Right. So, I mean, you just keep adding guards in this conversation. Some games are, obviously better than others, but I think the games that, the shot's not falling, they're not getting to the rim as much, kind of outweigh the best games too, because we already know what they can do great on the floor. But yeah, I think, Christian Anderson and, Wagler, they're not as up to speed defensively, right, as Phylon. I think Phylon, especially as a disruptor in passing lanes, is way better and, levels ahead than Anderson and Wagler too. But yeah, I mean, we could honestly make, an episode of just, deep dives of guard prospects. I know Rucker and Metcalf have some up on YouTube right now. That's a quick plug, but I mean, this guard class is loaded, Nick.
Yeah, no, it's absurd. And it's one of those things also where, like, I haven't dropped any guards, I think is the best way I can put it. It's just people keep jumping. They keep jumping higher. It's like Mikal Brown is lower on my board right now than he was to start the season. Mm-hmm. And that's not because of anything that he's done, but rather it's like, oh my God, Kingston Flemings. We haven't talked about Kingston Flemings. And part of the reason for that is because he's jumped above the range of these three guys, right? But it's like, nobody's on my board that, in terms of the guards in particular, nobody's falling. It's just, okay, this guy's been solid, but this guy's been sensational, so I got to bump him up a few spots, right? It's like that's been the story of this guard class, is just, man, over and over and over again. Just everybody keeps doing what they're supposed to. Like nobody other than Mikal Brown's shooting numbers, which are a little concerning, but not very concerning to me. Other than that, like, nobody's disappointed among the guards, and they've all just been stellar time and time again. It's really tough.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about Donovan Dunn injury kind of, prevailing him a little bit of what he can do on the court. So I was really happy to see, his, kind of comeback game, as you will, against Purdue. But yeah, even, my guy at Michigan State, Jeremy Fears, I mean, from his freshman year to this year, he's entering, second round conversations too, just because of his production. Obviously, he's not a shooter, right, from 3-point range. He still struggles there. He's shooting 25% as of right now. But I mean, his just impact and, his mentality on the court has really, and his leadership too, I think has grown tremendously since his freshman year. And just, how Izzo has been handling him, and him, just buying into that culture over there has been prevalent. So maybe that's someone we talk about next episode. Probably not, because I've already talked about a Michigan State guy, but I just want to bring up in terms of guards that have been impressed this year so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could do that, but I think we can't do that next episode now that you've done that. But hey,
who knows?
Keep your eyes peeled. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap this one up?
No, all good.
All right. Well, she is Paige Otto. You can find her over on social media at PaigeOtto_. And I'm saying this for the first time that it's actually been, a thing in a while. You can find her written work. Hey, there we go.
Yeah,
Paige and I have finally written this year.
We're back.
You can find her written work over on NoCeilingsNBA.com. You can find me across social media at NBA Johnson. If you've been enjoying the show, please take the time to leave a rating and or a review in whatever podcast player you might be using. That's always much appreciated on our end. Or, feel free to give us a like and subscribe and hop in the comments on YouTube as well. And if you've been enjoying the deep dives portion of the show, feel free to reach out to either of us via the aforementioned social media, or you can shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.